Welcome to the Introduction to Create Lists session. Today we're going to talk about one of the nice features of Sierra, which is Create Lists. And before we get too far into the session, I'm going to talk about the agenda here. We're going to talk about Create Lists briefly, explaining what it is, the things that you need to know before you begin searching. There is some thinking that you have to put into this before you start searching on a list, so it reduces the length of time that you're putting into this. It just reduces the frustration if you do a little thinking ahead of time. We'll talk about the new additions with Sierra. We've done this session many times, and this is the first time we're dealing with Sierra and Create Lists, so there's a few new wrinkles for those of you who have used Create Lists in the past. There's a few new benefits to using it with Sierra. The majority of the session we will go through the process of creating a list. We'll go through each of the options that are available to you and spend quite a bit of time talking about Boolean conditions and other things that you can do, putting your criteria statements together. We'll also talk about outputting the information to Excel. It's a very popular thing to do these days. In the past, listing or printing your items out to a list, it's still possible to do, but we're not going to cover that as much. It's the same process for the most part. But most folks are putting their data into Excel and then using Excel to manipulate or produce reports for their purposes. So we'll go over that and just show you a brief example about how to get your data into Excel. We'll talk about the MCFLS master lists and what those are and what their purpose is. Give you a few examples and show you how to run a sublist off of a MCFLS master list. We'll do a few brief exercises, giving you examples to work with, and I'll show you quite a few other examples that you can use for your own lists. And then we'll wrap up the session. The session we did on Tuesday, we have many fewer people, so I'm not sure how it's going to go today. It depends on the questions. But that lasted about 2 hours or so. So I'm assuming it's probably going to be around that same time. So you can plan around 11 o'clock, 11:15, something like that. So before we get into the presentation, I also wanted to mention that we do have a website. The website name, if I go back to our title page here, it's www.mcfls.org/createlists, all one word. And if you go to that page, this is what it looks like. And I've updated all of this information over the last couple of weeks to be up to date with Sierra. There is at the top of the list here is a Create List manual. It's basically a 40-some page walkthrough that you can use if you have questions about how to create a list. Everything you need to know about Create Lists is in this PDF. And I should warn you, it's a fairly large file. It's if I click on my tab up here, this is that file. So it has all these screenshots and information is updated to use Sierra. So I won't go through that entire thing, but it is quite a bit of information, and you can use that to answer any questions that you have. Particularly if it's good for a reference, because there is quite a bit. Down to the bottom here, quite a bit of information about the fields that are available, and also near the end here is discussion of all the Boolean conditions that you can use in Create Lists. So if you have questions after the session and perhaps I'm not available at the time that you want to create your list, you can certainly look at this, and this is going to give you all the information that you need. Also on this page we have the PowerPoint slides that I'm using today. There's an advanced session we'll talk about a little bit later. The PowerPoint slides are also there. Some other information, these ranges of various record types file assignments and master lists. These are links directly into the knowledge base. And then below that we have updated examples of particular lists that you may want to create, such as, for example, searching for call numbers, fiction call numbers, searching for new registrations, a lot of CERC, a lot of database maintenance, not a whole lot of acquisitions examples in here, but if you ever have questions about that, I can certainly help you. So that's there is a web page with all this information on it. We also have if you go to MCFLS.org, the staff area, and I click on that, I'm logged in here as myself, and for all the staff and directors, there's a page called Continuing Education, and beneath that we have some Sierra stuff here, and then beneath that are Create List training resources. So all these links are pretty much the same as this other page. However, it does include and I just uploaded this from Tuesday, is a complete training session that we did on Tuesday. But you'll have the benefit of actually asking questions or getting better information, since I'm doing this the second time around this week. So in any case, these two pages here, and this is probably the more complete version of it, but there are some information available here within the MCFLS.org site. And before we get into the presentation as well, I just wanted to mention, if you do have questions, everybody's mic is turned on, so you can certainly ask questions if you like. In your GoToMeeting console, at the bottom of your console is a chat area as well. And if you like to instead send a question or comment via chat, feel free to do so. And then we'll take care of it there. I'll try to keep track of that. But you can ask those at any time, and we'll address those. We have a fairly decent-sized group, but it's not overwhelming, so we should be able to handle those questions as they come up. Okay, so our first question on the agenda here is, what is Create Lists? Well, it's a report generator. First of all, it's a function within Sierra. It's part of the Sierra client, and if we go into Sierra, you'll see that it's one of the many functions listed underneath. In my case, I have it under administration, but it's underneath circulation, cataloging, you name it, Create Lists is probably there. And it is a report generator, but simply put, it's just a collection. It's a function that allows you to create lists of bibliographic, item, patron records, order records. It's what it is. It's creating a list of records, and that's really all it is. But it's very powerful in that it gives you the ability to group criteria statements to be able to find those records, and that's where the tricky part comes in. You have to know how that works and how the Create Lists works as a computer in order to generate those lists, in order to get the most out of it. For our purposes, for a more practical application, it is a management tool. It's a collection management tool. You can use this to find errors in your records. You can use it to find shelf lists, anything that you can think of that you would need a list of records for, you can use with Create Lists. It's a very powerful tool, and it goes far beyond what you might think. There's a lot more to it. So before you get started creating a list, we'll go through a couple things you need to think about. And this hasn't changed too much from Millennium to Sierra. It's about the same. First of all, you need to consider the file assignments that we've set up for all MCFLS member libraries. And one of the links here on the Create List page is that of file assignments for each library. And this is really important for us to maintain some semblance of order on Create Lists. We have 360 review files We used to have 280, but it was not nearly enough, so we upgraded those to 360, which seems like a lot, but it gets filled up very quickly. And on occasion, what you'll see is people squatting on other libraries' files. Let's just take a look at those here. This is the insert DO5 on create list file assignments. Each library, starting at the very top of the list of review files, has been assigned two review files, one of 5,000 max records and one of 20,000 max records. That's been that way for quite a long time. And so here's the list of the current records going up all the way up to file 54. Below that, or I should say, yeah, below that is MPL Central. MCFLS has some files, and these other ones are master lists that we've put together for MCFLS. Everything else, remaining files, pretty much everything above 100 is fair game unless it's a MCFLS file, which are very few. So you've got quite a few files to work with. So just keep that in mind, particularly these top 54 or so. Use the file that you've been assigned, and for more importantly, don't squat on someone else's files. One thing that people have done in the past, which I think is useful, we take a look. This is a create list here. You'll notice that even if there's nothing in the file, looking at Greenfield here, they've just renamed the file GRFI Greenfield assigned file, so that there's no question about the fact that this is a Greenfield file. And you may decide that you want to do that. Center Street has done the same up here. Hales Corners has done the same for 25 and 26. There's nothing in these files. You can see their current records are 0, but you can certainly rename the file using this rename button at the top, upper right, and then rename your file and just make sure no one else is going to use it. Otherwise, folks get tempted to just find the first file that looks good and is empty and just start searching. If you ever run into a problem with someone squatting on your assigned file, just let me know. I'm more than happy to delete or move that file. I get pretty ruthless with create lists. So if there is something, I usually don't delete it, but I will move it. There's some problem that you're experiencing with someone on your assigned file, just let me know. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second one here about the information that you need, it's probably the most important part of putting a list together, thinking logically about the information that you need and the sets of data that you need to put in your criteria statements to get that information. So if we take a look, I have a slide here, kind of jump around. This is an example of a search that you may apply to the database. So your topic or your search here is, I want to find all Oak Creek DVD and CD items added to the database since the beginning of 2014. When I come across this type of information need or create list need, the first thing I think about is breaking up the components of the search into sections that I can use to apply and create lists. So these might be, for example, Oak Creek, finding all the Oak Creek items. So that would be this green area here. The DVD and CD items, that's another subset or another set of data that I can use in create lists. That's a chunk that I can search on. So that's in this blue area. And then the dark area are all the items added to the database since the start of 2014. So joining all those together with an AND statement, you have this Venn diagram. This is great because I get to use Venn diagrams here, which is very rare for me. But I'm an old philosophy major, so I used to use these all the time. But what you end up with is this section here, right in the middle, is this confluence of all of these three. And that's the set of data we want to find. If you don't do your search right, you may get items bleeding in from one of these sections that you don't want. And we'll go through some of those examples to kind of guard against doing that. It usually involves grouping statements together correctly. Otherwise, you get into issues. So, long story short, with regarding to thinking about your data, you want to think in terms of sets of data, Oak Creek items, DVD and CD items, and items added to the database since the beginning of 2014. You want to break it up into chunks so you can use that and create lists. Another consideration, and these are fairly simple, is the size of the file that you need. If we go back to our Create List window here, scroll down a little bit. If you're doing, and this is something you just have to be considerate of others with, if you're searching for an individual patron, like for example, somebody's got a phone number or an email address that you need to find in the database, you can use Create Lists to find that. But generally speaking, you're not going to need a 40,000 max records review file to do the job. A 5,000 max record will do the job just as well. 1,000, there's even, you scroll further down the list here, there are 500 max review files. Those tend to get full up pretty quick. But do your best to not squat on a 100,000 max record review file for something you know is only going to pull up maybe 10, 15, 20 records. If you're searching on your entire collection, for example, if you want the entire Franklin collection in a review file as far as items go, you would definitely choose something around 100,000 or 200,000 to get that file in there. Now these file max records range in size. You can sort on these column headers here at the top from 500 all the way up to 1,000,000 records, and that's file 360. You can always use this max file. Generally speaking, you're probably not going to need something that big, but if you're doing a big project on your collection, you can let me know if you want to use this file, or just go ahead and use it and just empty it out when you're finished. If I see that it's full, I'm probably going to call you, and it's a couple days old. Because we generally use this file for either MCFLS stuff or some other folks use it for other purposes. So I'm going to scroll up to the top here. Another important consideration, and this gets a little complicated, is the record format you're storing. So let's go through a brief process of creating a list, and I can show you what I'm talking about. Just choose an empty review file, click on Search Records to start the file. I'm not going to name it here because I'm just going to show you what this looks like. This is one of the more important areas in Create Lists to get the correct information out of it. Your stored record type determines quite a bit in terms of the records you're storing, what kind of records are you actually going to be collecting, be it bibliographic, item, patron, or order records, but it also determines what other information you can search on. So for example, well, let's go back to my slide because I want to show you what this is all based on. There's another slide I have here called the Law of One Hop. And it sounds funny, but it's actually pretty accurate. Just consider this, for example, to be your stored record. Your bibliographic record is the stored record in our list. The law of one hop, and that's what Innovative uses, it makes sense. And that determines that the bibliographic record, if that's the stored record type, you can search on information linked to that bib record. Logically. So bib records are a good example because they're usually the top of the hierarchy. Many other records are linked to a bib record. So for example, an order record is subsumed under a bib record, item record has a link to a bib record, and a check-in record can also be linked to a bib record. This means I can search on information if my stored record type is bib. I can search on order record fields, item record fields, check-in record fields, if my stored record type is bib. However, if my stored record type is patron, that changes the whole dynamic here. There are no links between patron records and bib records, so it cannot search on bib record information if my stored record type is patron, and vice versa. If my stored record type is bib, there is no link from bibs to patrons, logically speaking, in the database. Patrons don't check out bibs; they check out items. So there is a link between items and patrons, but not bibs and patrons. So if we go back to our review file search, my stored record type here is bibliographic records. If I go down here to the type of information I want to get out of, this is where you would determine what type of fields that you can search on. So if I double click in this area, it'll give me all the options I have for searching off of bibliographic records. So I can search bibliographic fields, order fields, check-in fields, or item fields. You'll notice patron is not listed here because there's no link there. However, if I change my stored record type to patron, I now can search off of just patron fields and item fields because there's a direct link between the two. So it gets a little confusing. When you start messing around with the stored record type, that determines really from that point forward what fields that you can search on. One other thing I'd mention about this as well, generally speaking, if you're searching for information about your collection, you generally want to avoid using stored record type of bibs unless the bib information is what you need. I generally stick with items because it gets a little tricky because of the relationship between bibliographic records and item records. With bibs and items, there's a one-to-many relationship. So one bib can have one or 300 items attached to it, and the relationship between the two complicates your create list search. So if you're searching on your stored record type is bib and you start searching on item level information, let's just say status here, we'll grab status. Okay, so if my stored record type is bibliographic records, that's what I'm storing, and I start putting in item searches, like item field searches, and item status equal to build, it's not just going, the logic here dictates that when you do a search like this, what you're actually searching for is, you can even imagine here, at least one item has a status equal to build. Doesn't mean all of the items attached to that bibliographic record have the same status of build, but at least one item has that status equal to build. So when you're putting searches together like this, I try to avoid using bibliographic, stored record types, and item searches like this because it complicates matters. What you ended up having to do is something like an item stored record type and then do your item search like this. And then you're certainly going to get just item records with this status of build. So if your stored record type is item, it's not looking at bibliographic information up one level. It's just going to find all the items with that status. I know it's a little complicated, but that's the type of thing that will screw up your searches pretty easily. So you want to avoid kind of cross record type searches. Just kind of keep it as simple as possible. And by all means, if you have questions or can't get a search to work, please contact me. I can usually figure it out within a few seconds of looking at it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my slide here. Okay, so we've discussed a lot of these things we need to take into account before we start searching. And before we start doing our walkthrough, I did want to talk about some of the aspects of the create list window that you, just very briefly about how this window is laid out. For those of you who are familiar with Millennium, this layout looks pretty similar to what we have been using before. However, all of these buttons, or tabs, I guess they're called buttons here, these buttons here on the left-hand side of the screen used to be tabs along the top. Where you see review files here, there used to be like a list of tabs. So that's really the biggest difference in terms of layout, but all the information here is the same. All your review files, your saved searches, sorts, lists, and exports are all there, but just in a different area. This row of buttons here, starting with search records, sort, list, export, show, and show info, these are pretty much the same as they had been before, but this is really these are the main buttons used for create lists. So the search records is the one you would use to start your search. Once it's finished, these buttons will light up, such as sort, list, and export. List and export are outputting the information from your list. Show records and show info are really useful for obviously showing your records, showing what's in the list. But show info, and we'll look at that in a few minutes. That's really good to see how your list was created. You can share that with other people, and it could also be useful for troubleshooting. These buttons here at the top, starting with append, dedupe, copy, empty, rename, these are pretty much the same. We're not going to really go into append and dedupe. We're going to cover that in the advanced class, but these are pretty easy to figure out what's going on, and it's actually in the manual too. The one thing that's different with Sierra versus Millennium is the fact that there is no suspend and resume. So that was taken out, which means basically you could suspend a search from collecting records and then resume the same search. They pretty much wiped that out of Sierra, so it's not available. If you have a report that's currently running, you can click the cancel button, but what that does is completely wipe out the search. So if you need that set of criteria in there and to save it somehow to the server, if you hit cancel, you're going to wipe out everything, including whatever criteria you had used to put it together. So just be careful when you're using cancel. Sometimes you have to do it because it's you know that there's an error, or there's some kind of issue with the search because it's getting too many or too few records, and then you can use cancel to just get rid of it. Lastly, there's a drop-down that many people don't realize exists here. This drop-down will tell you, will basically filter the list based on status. So if I wanted to find all of the empty files in this window, all I'd have to do is click on this drop-down and click on empty, and then all of these empty review files would show up. So it's a real simple way to find all the empty review files. If you want to find a list that you just started and you can't find it for whatever reason, you can use this in progress drop-down that will find anything that's currently running. And right now nothing's running on the system. And complete will obviously show you all of the completed review files, the ones that have finished processing. And as we showed before, all of these headers at the top of this window are sortable. So you could sort on name, for example, if you wanted to sort on the name of the review file, starting with the numbers and then going A to Z. You can find your file that way. You can also sort on login. So if you wanted to find your review files, you can get a nice list based on your login credentials. And you can also do the same for any of these other columns, create a date and time. I use this quite a bit when I'm clearing these review files out. Okay, so let's go back to our slides here. I did want to talk to you briefly about the new additions with Sierra before we actually create a list. There are new fields in bibliographic, item, and patron record searches for holds and finds. This is something we've been after for quite a long time, and I'll show you where those are located. If we go through the process of creating a list, we'll just choose file 97 here, click on search records, and I'm not going to create our list actually right here. I'm going to double click on the type area here, and if I wanted to search on these bibliographic hold information, I would select bibliographic for the type. Under field, I double click that area, and you'll notice there's a new tab here at the top for holds. So under this window, try to lengthen this out a little bit, you see that you can search for, this is looking at it from the bibliographic perspective, so it's looking at it from the bibliographic record and any holds attached to it. So you can search for the patron with the hold on this particular bib that you're going to be retrieving, whether it's frozen, when it expires, the status, pickup location, which is located here. Anything you see that has hold IR or in any one of these fields, you can just ignore because those refer to in-reach holds, and that's something we don't use on our system. If I change this type to item, you'll see the holds appear there as well. So there's hold information that you can search on for both item and bib. And for that matter, we change our stored record type to patron. There's also a new holds tab right there for here as well. So that's looking at it from two different directions, one from collecting item records with the holds on them and also patrons with holds. So you can say, I want to find these patrons and I want to see, what hold pickup location, I want to, limit it to a particular hold and what the pickup location is, or I want to, see all the frozen holds for a patron, that type of thing. In this case, it actually would show all the patrons that had frozen holds on them. So you could do a search using that. You would just do something like equal to true. So you can search the whole patron database and then look at it this way. The other area that I wanted to look at was the finds. So if we take a look at, we double click this field area again, you'll notice there's another tab here for finds. And here you can actually search on find information. So you can look at when the find was assessed, the terminal number, the initials, description, checkout day, a lot of date information, and you'll notice is on here. The loan roll used with the find. There's all kinds of more in-depth information than we've ever had with Millennium. So just to make you aware that these are here, if you wanted to search on find information or hold information. I've already used hold information for stale holds list to eliminate frozen holds from that list. So that's an example of how you would perhaps use that in an application. There are new operators for date fields for exist and not exist. And that kind of brings me, and we'll talk about these and how they could be used when we talk about the Boolean conditions. However, that kind of goes into this whole issue of we have a current problem with blank dates. So let's take a quick look at that as an example. So let's say we're looking for item due dates. Just use this as an example. This is something that people commonly do when they're looking for items that are check shelves, not currently out. If you do item due date equal to nothing and try to search against this, we're using the entire database here, but if you try to do this search right now, you're going to have issues. It's not going to allow the search to continue. So if I click on search here, I'll just put a test here. It's going to give you this error message, error occurred processing query. Now, this basically is a bug with the current version of Sierra that we have, and I'll show you a real easy workaround. So if we do the same search, instead of using equal to nothing to find everything that does not have a due date, you could just use not exist. And that basically gets the same records. It should get the same records in your search if that's what you're using. This has impact basically for fixed fields using dates. So things like out date, for bibliographic records, maybe cat date, things of that nature. So you want to use, if you're using date searches, you want to use not exist if it's available. If you run into problems, of course, with this, just let me know. On the good news side of the ledger, there is something new in Sierra that I think is very useful, and those of you who have seen it probably know about it already, but I just wanted to make mention of it briefly. There is a new function called browse query that's available in Sierra that had not been available in Millennium. So in order to see or do a browse query, you need to be in catalog mode, catalog function, or underneath circulation, search holds mode. Everyone should have catalog mode on their login. If you don't, let me know and I can change that for you. But if we go to catalog mode, browse query is underneath the tools menu here in the upper left-hand corner. It's available underneath tools, and you just click on it. What you end up with is a search screen that looks very similar to what we've just been using here for the last half hour or so. This is really different than create lists, though. With create lists, you're storing the records on the server, so there's a list of records stored on the server. With browse query, you're almost like creating, you're searching against the database, but it's almost as if you're doing like a title search or an ISBN search or some kind of author search. Those types of searches are not meant to be stored on the server. They're ephemeral, they're temporary, they don't stick on the server after you're done doing them. But what you can do, and this browse query is really useful for the types of searches that you want to do but can't because they're not indexed. So for example, a patron phone number search could be done using this browse query. Very simply, you could also do a patron email search. We'll do an example of one of those just to show you what it looks like. So what this is doing is looking at, we're storing our record type of patrons. Our range is the entire database. Just leave it as is. And then we do a patron search for email. I know the field is Z for email address. And then I can do a has. So if I do this type of search, it's going to look for all email addresses that have he's or somewhere in it. You could also do something like AOL.com or gmail.com, to find a particular pattern of within the email address that you're after. Usually you're going to look at for a specific, a very specific email address or part of the email address that's very specific. So all you have to do is put in this information here. You click on search, and you'll notice that there's no review file really hook up to this. It's applying this granular type search against the database, and then we'll bring this up, this list up. So here, you see my record. There's a whole bunch of test records that I've used in the past. So if we look at Theodore here, you can see my email address is part of this record. There's probably a bunch of test records that just need to get rid of. But that's an example of how you can make this work. And you can, when you double click on these records, if you have the ability to make changes or edit the patron records, which almost everyone does, you can make those changes and then save them immediately. So it's not just like a view-only or read-only view of the database. You can actually edit these records if you have the authorization to do so. However, when I open one of these, I can make my changes, but as soon as I click the close button up here or move to a different function, this list of records is basically this browse list will get removed. It's not meant to be saved anywhere, and if you need to export information from these records, you need to create a list. This browse query does not work for those types of things. But if you're looking for a patron phone number, an email address, a real quick list that you need to edit, it can do in a short period of time without fear of losing the list. This is a good option for just about anything you can think of. So if I click close, then it's gone. Then it's not saved anywhere. Okay. So let's go back to create list. We're going to go through the process of actually creating a list and try to keep it as simple as possible, but highlighting as much of the information that you would need to get started. Okay, so first off, we're going to choose an empty review file that I'll use 97 here. That's going to match some of our needs. It's not an overly large file. It's not too small for the type of file that we're going to create, so that's a good thing. Our search is going to be for basically this same query that we looked at before. All the Oak Creek DVD and CD items added to the database since the beginning of 2014. Since it's a fairly narrow scope, it's Oak Creek DVD and CD items added since the beginning of 2014. We don't need anything that's really enormous in terms of file size. We can use something that's reasonable, like 10,000 or 15,000, so that should work just fine. And it's, beyond that 54 number in terms of review files, so we're not going to be squatting on someone else's file as well. So the process goes like this. You click on Search Records at the top. You highlight an empty review file. This is empty for our purposes. You click Search Records at the top. And here's where I'm going to talk a little bit about how to name your review file. This information is located on that same insert that talks about the file assignments. If you look at the very bottom of that insert, there's 4 elements that you need to put as part of your review file name. It's a good habit to get into when creating your review files. The first one is your library name. This is usually something, could be as simple as 4 characters like this for Oak Creek. Others folks use like FOHO, we can see here, CentAct, something that identifies who is creating the review file. The second part of this would be a brief description about what the review file contains. So this will be DVD, CD, items 2014, something like that, just indicates what's in the file. And then the last 2 parts are simple. It's just your initials and then today's date. So today would be the 20th. And that's all you need to do. Putting in the date really helps me in particular when I'm cleaning out review files. I clean out review files at the beginning of every quarter. So we just did one in October where I will look at every review file older than 3 months. So in October I looked at everything older than July 1 and remove those from the database unless someone had explicitly asked me not to delete it. This way we clean up these review files. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to find an empty review file that you can use. So we do that process every quarter. Putting in a date helps me identify those old review files. There is a created column, but I prefer that people keep putting in those dates just as a good habit, and that allows you to keep track of them as well. Okay, so the second part of this is the stored record type, which we've talked about at length. In our case, since we are after items belonging to a specific library, we're not going to mess around with bibliographic level information. We really want items. And 9 times out of 10, items are what you're going to deal with when you're talking about your collection. That's the one you want to focus on. So your stored record type is almost always going to be item. After that's been selected, we now have a couple options here with regard to what slice of the database we're looking at. The default is this range option here. And that basically looks at the entire database or entire set of item records in the database. That's your default. You'll notice that these start and stop numbers can be edited. So I can wipe this out and put in my own stop number, or I can type an I and get the latest number back here. Or I can wipe out the start number and put my own number there as well. This is important because it allows you to search on a particular set of item records. So go back to I have this other insert here for ranges of various record types by year based on created date. If we look at that insert, what we have is a list of all of the item record numbers for example, 2014 started with this record number. So I'm going to copy that, I'm going to put it into my search, and I can address one of the criteria that I need to find, which is everything added to the database since the beginning of the year. We also have record numbers for everything going back to 98 for items, bibs, patrons, and also orders. We started doing that in 2007. We try to update this right at the beginning of the year so we get those current numbers in as soon as possible. So I'm going to copy that number, and I'm going to replace the start number with this number. The A is important because that indicates a check digit for the record number. So as long as you put in everything, you can omit the period, but everything from the I to the A is what you need to put in to the stop number or start or stop number area. And the stop number is going to be the latest record added to the system. And if you'll notice, if I keep hitting the letter I, it will give me the latest item record added to the database. So I can wipe this out, hit I, and then the latest one will keep appearing. So if you're using this search for any length of time and you want to get the latest record number to appear in the stop area, you can just wipe it out and hit I, and it will do the same. You can do the same with bibs and patrons. You just hit the B or P, whatever it is that you're using. So go back to our search here. We've already addressed one of these areas, which is since the beginning of 2014. So we can remove that from our list of concerns in terms of putting a statement together. The next part that we have to put together are these criteria statements, and this is where you're going to narrow down your search within the range that we're looking at to a specific subset of items. So the way it works, and we've been doing this a little bit, one of the more common searches that you'll use is limiting it to a specific library location. So if you're looking at a set of item records and you want to limit it to, in our case, Oak Creek, this is how you would do it. It's the most effective way of doing it. First of all, your type is going to be item. When we search type item, it limits our fields to item record fields. So we're going to double click here. And we have our fixed fields at the top, variable fields at the bottom. In our case, we're going to choose number 79 here, item location. You'll notice that all of these fields have a number or a letter in the upper left-hand corner of these buttons. These are essentially shortcuts. So I can double-click this area and then choose 79, or just wipe this out. If I know that items always start with an I, that use that for the type, hit Enter or Tab to get over to the field column, and then type in 79 if I know that that's my item location. You can also use the up and down arrows to go up and down this list. So there are a number of different ways you can get to the field information. And then for our condition here, we're going to use the has condition. And I'll explain why that's important here in a second. So our item loc has, in this case, 24. One of the more common mistakes people will make with create list is this urge to use equal to 24. And this will get you next to nothing in your list, because item location equal to 24 will not include 24A, 24Y, 24C, because it's looking for an exact match. And there are very few items that have 24 as the item location. Everything usually has something after it. So if we look at 24A, all of these item locations would be omitted from our search if we did equal to. If we use has, then it's going to just look for anything that has 24 in the item location. And that's, you always want to use has when you're searching on item locations. For those of you from Brown Deer or North Shore or Central, you would have to use within. Comes up as between, but it's actually within. And for North Shore, for example, it would be 8A, 8C, CZZ, and what that's basically looking for is this item location has to start with an 8A, and then there may actually be no 8CZZ. It doesn't matter. It's going to look for everything in between, and that's how you would get your item locations for that. Okay, so I'm going to change this to 24. And so that's another area of our search here for Oak Creek. So we've got the 2014 taken care of, and we have the Oak Creek part taken care of as well. The next area that we need to focus on are the format of the materials that we need to limit it to. So we've got Oak Creek dealt with. We're going to AND by using the append line button. Let's just delete that so I can explain that a little bit better. There are two ways to insert other criteria statements into your crate list review file search, and that is insert line, which will put it above the current line, or append line, which will put it below. I usually use append because it's just easier to keep track of what I've been putting in. In some cases, you may use insert just to put it in, where it logically needs to go. So in this case, because I have a stored record type of item, I can also link to bibliographic information. So if I'm limiting it to DVDs and CDs, the easiest way to get that data limited is to use bibliographic level information for mat type. You have an option here of doing it by item type as well. If you wanted to do that, you could certainly do it that way. This way is just easier and a little bit more foolproof because the bibliographic information is usually pretty solid in terms of the type of material type used. So in this case, we would use bibliographic mat type, and here is where I want to talk about Boolean conditions. So bear with me, it's going to take a little bit of time to kind of work through this. But it's really important because this will, these are some tricks that I've learned over the years in actually getting data out of this, out of these review files. So by Boolean conditions, what we're talking about are these connectors between the field that you're searching on and the values in those fields. So we've talked about a few of these before, but I wanted to talk specifically about all of these and what you can do with them. So the first one here we're going to talk about is equal to. That's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to be looking for a mat type equal to a certain value. So we'll double-click on the list here, and then we can search on, for example, in our case, the DVDs, which are located, if I can find them, right at the top here. And you'll notice that when you use the equal to condition and you tab over, you can actually go up and down this list just like you could do with the field areas. You can only do this for equal to and not equal to. Otherwise, it won't allow you to actually use the index of available values. Okay, so we'll leave that DVD. If I use something like, for example, has, which is probably legit, you could actually use this if you wanted to. You'll notice that if I use the up and down arrows, it doesn't do anything. If I double click here, it does nothing because there is no one-to-one relationship. It's not able to search an exact value in the table there that it uses. So equal to is pretty self-explanatory. You're looking for an exact match. One of the things you can do, not with date fields unfortunately, is leaving the equal to value to nothing. So if you look at, if we're looking for bibliographic mat types equal to nothing, you may use that type of search to find errors in your coding because virtually everything's going to have a mat type associated with it. Another example might be item type. You want to find errors in your items where item type equals nothing because you want to fix those. You want to add an item type to those items, fix those, because otherwise the loan rules are not going to work properly. So that's an example where you could use equal to nothing. On the other flip side of that is there is a condition called not equal to. And if we use that condition, it also is self-explanatory. You can search the index up and down of acceptable values. Do whatever you want here. So that also, you can use that condition. It's also really useful for searching for fields that you don't care what's in the field, you just want to know something is there. A good example of that is patron email addresses. Say, for example, you want a list of all your patrons with email addresses. You could do something like, what do you have to choose? Patron email address not equal to nothing. The logic here would indicate that if it's not equal to nothing, it's got to be equal to something. We don't care what the something is. It could be an AOL address, it could be a Gmail address, it could be Yahoo. We don't care what's in the field. We just want to know something's there. You can use that type of search to limit and find those patrons with email address by using this particular search. So it's using the logic of the computer to your advantage. Another example would be, or another condition we would look at here would be these permutations of greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. Those are all pretty much the same. So if we do, for example, an item search here for, this is really good when you're looking at numbers. So fields that use values such as money or checkout numbers, like let's see here, total checkout is greater than 5 or something like that, where you're trying to get an idea of how many items have a total checkout greater than 5. You could do something like that with a greater than or less than condition. The thing you don't want to use with greater than or less than are dates. At the risk of getting complete silence, can someone, let's just do a search here, do our due date search. We'll do a less than 2014. If we did this, this looks like it might make sense. Our item due date is less than October 14th of 2014. You can use the chat interface or just voice your opinion. Why do you think this would cause a problem? If we just did the search like this, why would it not work? Can anyone chime in and let us know what that would be? You can use the chat interface too if you like. Okay, so I'm sure the suspense is killing you. I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer anyway. The answer to this is that the due date field, if you do less than, the way the computer works is it's going to find any due date less than this, an actual date less than or earlier than October 14th. But it's also going to put in any item with a due date that's blank. So to find date fields, a range of date fields, you have to use the within condition. So usually for dates, you want to put something really ridiculously far in the past, like 1/1. I usually use 1/1/1991. And then that will actually find legit dates, fields with a due date where the date actually is in there, and everything up until October 14th, 2014. Just use that as an example. You could use this type of method for due dates, anything that could possibly have a blank date field. Updated dates, created dates generally don't have blank fields within them because they have to have a field for when they were updated last or created. So those ones aren't as difficult to deal with as due dates. That's a prime example. Okay, we've already looked at has. Has is the contains. It basically means contains. So item loc has 24 is our example here. Another version of that is, just use item loc here. Item loc, the opposite of this would be all fields don't have, or at least one field doesn't have. So that's the opposite of have, that all fields don't have. So if we use this one, I want to give you an example where that might be helpful. You want to use all fields don't have, or at least one field doesn't have, when it's particularly useful for fields where information can be duplicated. You can have more than one field. It's particularly for variable length fields like note fields, like message fields, addresses, patron names. You can even look at barcodes. There's multiple barcode fields. It's useful for that. So like item note, all fields don't have. And I use this a lot when I'm putting the transit list together, the too long in transit list. So if we put something like November 2014, what that's going to eliminate are all of the fields where, are all the records, I should say, where there's a note field, which actually should be a message, sorry about that, where the transit message has November 20th, 2014. I have to use this type of criteria to eliminate those item records with transit messages that are recent. So what I'm after in that list is everything older than 2 weeks. By putting this type of statement in, I can remove that from consideration. So that's just one example where you might use this type of condition. And lastly, I just wanted to take a look at starts with and ends with. These are relatively new conditions that have been added recently. So let's just say we have a patron email address. We'll start our email address thing. Email address starts with Steve, something like that. You could find an email address using this type of condition here. The other thing that you can use, probably be more helpful, is ends with. And you can use, for example, all the Gmail addresses if you wanted to find all the gmail.com addresses, or AOL. You can use all kinds of applications. If you know that there's a consistent pattern at the beginning or the end of the value that you're looking for, you can use starts with and ends with. So it's all about matching, finding patterns with a lot of these conditions. Okay, so that's my spiel about conditions. And again, all of this information is in that manual that we've talked about. It's this page 50 is where it starts here. But all of these conditions are looked at in great detail, excruciating detail. So you can take a look at those. If you have any questions, of course, let me know. Okay, so we're going to wipe this guy out, delete that line. So we're back to our item loc has 24. The next section here is to limit it to the specific format the items we're after. So we're going to append 2 lines because we're after both DVDs and CDs. So our first line here is to limit our mat type to H. So it's bib. 30 is the number for mat type, equal to H DVD, and it's nice that it kind of shows you what the description is of the value there. I tab over, go to the operator. This is kind of important. You want to make sure your operators are lined up here. So I'm after both DVDs and CDs, but I have to put in an OR here because I want to find either one of the two. Then I'd put in another line here for mat type and music CD. So these are all the statements I need to put in here to get the types of items I want in my list. However, if I ran this right now as is, I would have an error. And the reason being is that the logic used by create lists is doesn't quite make sense all the time, but this is what happens. If I ran this search right now, what I would get are all the items owned by Oak Creek that are DVDs, so that's fine. And then it would just give me everything in the database that's a music CD. So it wouldn't limit it to those items owned by Oak Creek. It would just give me everything owned by everybody that's a music CD. All the items with a bib mat type equal to C. To get around that, you need to use what's called grouping. And you need to group both of your mat type searches together. So it's looking at that set first and then anding it to your Oak Creek statement. So we do how we do this is we select the lines 2 and 3. You'll notice as soon as we highlight both of those lines, and you do this by clicking on the number here, 2, hold down the Shift key, and select number 3. And you'll notice that your group button now lines up, and you can group both of those criteria statements together. And voila, there you go. It kind of works like a mathematical function in that the computer looks like at everything that has parentheses around it and does that operation first and then ands it to the statement regarding Oak Creek items. That's kind of what's working here. In order for it to work correctly, that's what you have to do. Many of the mistakes I see with create lists are some kind of grouping issue of some sort that's involved here. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this search, and we'll see what actual items we end up with. So to do this, we're going to click on the search button here. We'll take a look at these other buttons as soon as the search is done. You'll notice that it says in progress here in the status area, and then cancel is lit up here if I wanted to cancel it. Now the search is already done, so it's over with. We have 1,161 items in our review file. You'll see it's named appropriately over here. To actually look at the criteria that we use, if, say, for example, there's a mistake, we used the wrong operator. Yeah, for example, if we used equals or some other something like that, you would use, you could look at your conditions and make sure that they're okay. So in order to see what you've used for troubleshooting, you can click on Show Info and see what you've actually used, including your ranges and your store record type. You can't really edit anything here. It just shows you what you've got. To actually show the records, you can just click on that button, and then you can just double click any one of these records or hit the edit button. And let's see if that actually matches our criteria. So this particular title, Earl Scruggs and Friends, is looks like a music CD. It was created on January 7th and is a Oak Creek item. So that matches all three of those areas that we're after. And I think Amy's got a question here. Instead of grouping, could you use values A and B somehow? You might. Let's take a look here. It depends on the type of search. Now, you could do a range, like for example, bibliographic mat type within C and H. So it would be looking at all the mat types between C and H. That's usually what you would do with a within condition, but you're going to have to see, do some calculations to see what mat types are between C and H. So you're going to get like everything between D, you're going to get all kinds of other mat types in between those two, but that's basically what you would end up with, and then you would have to sort through that if you didn't want to do the grouping. The grouping just makes it easier to work with all that information. Good question, though. Okay, so for example, let's just say we look at show info, and instead of our item log using has, we do an equal condition, and we made a mistake. Let's just say we want to do it over again. The easiest way to redo a search after you've done it the first time is to highlight the same file number, click on Search Records. It says you're going to overwrite the contents. We don't really care because it's a mistake. Say yes, and you'll notice your review file name is in there. It's input, but everything else is kind of wiped out. So how do you get your search criteria back in there to make the corrections? Easiest way to do that is use existing search. You can use this in a number of different ways. You can, but what it basically does is when you click on it, it shows you, hopefully in a second here, all right. What it should be doing is showing me all the existing searches that are out there, and I can pull in that criteria from before. So it looks like my window is stuck here, so I'm going to do a little. Okay, so that freed it up somehow. I'm going to cancel and go back here. Sorry about that. So I'm going to click on Use Existing Search. And what I'm going to do is find my file number 97. As soon as I highlight it, you'll notice that it has my criteria statements already in there along with my range. And when I click on Use, it pops all the information that I had in there previously, and then I can make my corrections, say this was equals, now it's going to be has, and then I can run my search over again. So that's really a nice, easy way to import existing search criteria into your current search. And you can just make corrections. I do this all the time. You can imagine how many mistakes I make with create lists. The other options down here is that I can save this existing search as a query. So I can save the criteria to the database, to the server, and then recall that set of search criteria at any time in the future. So if I look at this, if I click on Save, I can give this a name like Oak Creek Test, and I have the option to include the record information, which means our start and stop ranges would be included in this saved search. If I check that box and hit Save, give me a confirmation box here, and click Yes, and then it'll be saved to the database, saved to the server. That's an easy way to just do that. And then on the flip side, you can retrieve that saved query at any time. So if we click on Retrieve Save Query, and scroll all the way down. Your new ones are always going to be at the bottom. I can click on Oak Creek Test and then pull it right in. Click Select and it will just load it. This looks like a daunting list of almost 400 items, but if you click on the query name header, it will sort it alphabetically, and then you can find your library's saved searches pretty easily. So our Oak Creek test here is at 286 now. And then it pulls it right in. Okay, and before we get into, I'm going to close this out because we don't want to really change anything. You have a couple options I wanted to point out here before we get into the output. One of these is the sorting, and this is really important for folks dealing particularly with types of lists where you want to sort the information. You can do multiple levels of sorting. So for example, if we highlight our list, click on Sort Records, what you're going to do is put in here levels of sorting. So since we have two material types involved in this list, we probably want to sort by mat type. And when you double click in this area here, all of these fields are available. This might be an error because they really should only show the ones that you have access to. In this case, bibs and items and patrons, but everything shows up here. So you can put in bib and then put in our mat type field, which is 30. So what this is going to do is put our list into two sections, sort it alphabetically by two sections, or in two sections, I should say, DVDs and music CDs. So that's the top level sort. Within that sort, within each one of these sections for mat type, you can then put a secondary sort for example, title. So we'll have two sections for mat types, and then within each section will be a sort by title, and then you could do further sorts if you wanted to. We'll just keep it simple by doing something like that. So I could save this sort also, this list of criteria, to the server using save this sort, just like we did with the search, or apply save sort that we previously saved using this button. So if I click on sort here, it should only take hopefully a few minutes, not a minute, less than that. We've got only 1,100 records, so hopefully you'll notice the status says sorting here. When that says complete, then we know our sort is finished. Okay, so now it's complete. If we highlight our review file and then click Show Records, you'll notice that everything in here is sorted alphabetically by title, and with the numbers at the very top. So these are all sound recordings. These are sorted by music CD first, and if we go down to like the 200s, or even further down, I think it might be, yeah. So we have a lot more DVDs in this list than music CDs. So we go to number 241 on the list. That starts the DVD part of this list. So it's sorted by music CD, DVD, and then within each list by title. So that's a sorting mechanism at work. Once you export it to Excel, you can do all kinds of additional sorting if you want to do it that way. One other thing I wanted to mention about these lists, if you wanted to, for example, you're looking at a list of items you want to remove from your collection, one of the easiest ways you can do this is to create a list of the items you want to delete, and you can review those items in a list. Say, for example, this 5 Seconds of Summer might be on my delete list, the one that I created, but I want to remove it from the list because I don't want to delete it. I want to keep it in my collection for whatever reason. You can remove any of these items from the list by clicking on the remove icon here up top, and it'll just remove it from the list. So now our full review file is going to have 1160 items rather than 1161. Okay, so one of the last things we're going to talk about here is exporting. What the process here is we're going to highlight our review file. We're going to click on the Export Records button, and you see a window that looks very similar to what we had just been working with, sorting our review file. A lot of the same principles at work here. What you can do is put in the export item of fields to be exported here in this list. How you envision this is that for each row that you put in here, you can consider those to be the columns that will eventually be created in Excel. So in our list, we may want to put in something like the bibliographic created date, the bib title, we might want to put in, we'll append another line here and put in item barcode, append another line, and then put in item call number. I'm just making things up. You probably would have a better list than this, but I'm just using this as an example. So for each one of these 4 lines we put in, those are going to be the columns that are created in Excel, and with underneath each column, the field values for every one of those records in the list. So that's all created here. The next step you have is to determine some of this information at the very bottom. You could leave this as is. For the most part, you're not going to want to mess around with the field delimiter and all these other things. It'll work just fine with Excel. Excel can read these values very easily. There may be some times when you want to use a different field delimiter. By default, it's the comma character, which is very common and Excel can use very easily. In order to use a different character to separate your field values, for example, your created date would be separated here with a comma from your title, and then also your barcode and call number would be separated by commas. And that's the way that Excel reads that data, is it uses the commas as basically column markers. It separates the data using that comma. You can use a different character other than a comma. For example, in some cases I have to use this wavy sign. I think it's the tilde. It's right next to the 1 on your keyboard. In most cases, though, I'm either using a comma or a control character. Control characters are things like carriage returns. Generally, you don't use those. There's some cases that I do, but generally I use 9, and 9 indicates a tab. So Excel usually looks at, when it's importing data to look at, it usually uses field separators or delimiters using a tab or a comma. Some cases a tab might be necessary, particularly if you've got commas in your data, like author names or something of that nature. Usually it's not a problem even with those, but some cases you may need to use it. I would suggest that unless you really need to change this area, keep it at comma and deal with the problems afterward. Don't overthink things. The rest of this information can pretty much be remain as is. The last step before exporting your file is to use this Browse button at the very bottom. So if we click on Browse, it's going to ask us to find a location where we're going to create this file of Oak Creek DVD and CD items. So we can call this anything we want. And there's a trick to doing this which will save you a little bit of time. By default, it tries to save it with a file extension of TXT, which is just fine, but it takes a little bit longer for you to import that data into Excel. If you save it, if you change this field files of type to all files, and then add a file extension of .csv to your file name, this will make it a comma separated value file, which Excel can read right off the bat and knows what to do with it as soon as you double click on it. So I would highly recommend using this. If you have issues, you can certainly call me, but this is pretty much straightforward. Save everything as a .csv file if possible. And then you click on Save here to input that file location. It's going to create this on the fly. You don't have to have an existing file. It's going to create it on the fly, but this is a location where that file is going to be located. So we have similar buttons to our sort and save searches. We can save this list of criteria to the server or import something we've currently saved. When we click OK, it's going to start creating a file. So let's go ahead and do that. Sometimes this will take a little bit of time, like 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the amount of records that you have to export. I've known that when we export data to, for example, Novelist or some other vendor, it takes quite a bit of time to get that information out. But this one was fairly short, and it's they've been improving it with Sierra even since we've had it since April. Okay, so now that that window is gone, we know that the file's been created. We can go find it and then open it up in Excel. So what we're going to do is I'm going to navigate in my local file system here, and I'm going to go to my computer. I know that we saved it on the top level of the C drive, so you may want to just choose something like that so you know where that file is going to be located. And then you'll notice that my icon, you can see it up here, has a little X in it. It looks like Excel will be able to read it. You'll notice when I mouse over it, it'll say Microsoft Excel, comma, separated values file. So Excel knows what to do with it. So all you have to do is double click on this, and it will pop in the data in the correct columns. Now it doesn't mean you don't have some work to do. You have to format these column lists. So we have 4 columns here, and what I'm going to do is actually going to, for each one of these, I'm going to work with the width of the column. I'm just going to click and drag these. For these shorter ones, you don't have to worry too much. Okay, so we have 4 columns here: our created date, title, barcode, and call number. You'll notice that the barcode looks really wonky right now, and that's because it doesn't know what format type to use with the data. Right now it's viewing it in general, which is kind of a generic format. But in order to change it to actually look like a barcode, you have to highlight the column and then use this area here for formatting to change it from general to number. And when you click on that, it should give you the barcode as it's supposed to look, the 14-digit barcode. You'll notice it has 2 decimal points behind it that we want to get rid of. In order to get rid of those, we would have to click on this little button here for decrease decimal. That will get rid of that those decimal points. You just click it until those numbers look like barcodes. So here you have a list of all your CDs and DVDs in Oak Creek added since the beginning of the year, and you can use that list in Excel for whatever purpose you want. You can sort further here if you want to go back to just a complete title sort. You could use the sorting function within Excel, going up to the upper right-hand corner, sort A to Z. It's always going to ask you if you want to expand the selection because it doesn't. It's only going to, unless you continue with the current selection, it's only going to sort it in this column. You always want to sort it, expanding it so all of the columns are affected. So you leave it as is, click on sort, and then all of your titles are interfiled here, and then you can do with it what you will. So once you get into Excel, the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do with it. If you're working with monetary data, checkout data, what I've found recently is useful is the pivot tables. So I use these with overdraft statistics. Those of you who have seen those, pivot tables are quite involved in there, and it just gives you a table to kind of sort your data with. If you have questions about that, it's a little bit more involved past the scope of this training. But if you have questions about pivot tables, I know very little about them other than I've gotten them to work with overdraft statistics, so it's a little bit limited. But that's the type of thing that you can do with Excel. Once you get it in here, you can start messing around with the data. Okay, the last thing I wanted to cover before we get into some exercises was MCFLS master list. So I'm going to go back to our slides here. Oh, yeah, I've got a question from Amy here. Yeah, there are created dates prior to 2014. Well, I probably should have used a different date field, but if we go back here, these are created dates for the bibliographic record, not the item record. So these item record, if we look at those item records in that list, the item record created date was probably okay, but these bibliographic record are probably older than those item records. So yeah, I'm sorry, that was just confusing. What I probably should have done is exported the item created date instead of the bibliographic created date. That's basically what's going on there. Okay, let's see. Let's go to our slides. Just to fill a few follow-up things here. I just want to talk briefly about MCFLS master list. For those of you who have been in the system for a while, there's quite a few out there, I think. You'll remember when searching an item record range in our database took 4.5 to 5 hours minimum. That was during peak times, but it would still take you hours and hours to search through the database, whereas now it takes about 15 minutes. Because of that fact, we had created these MCFLS master lists usually overnight when no one was on the system, so that they would run quicker. But basically, they were meant so that they would save staff time in creating their own lists. So they're usually meant to identify important tasks in database maintenance, circ, collection development, and the whole process is that we would create a master list of, for example, like missing items or calf leg J items. And then you would, the library, for example, Oak Creek or St. Francis, Greendale, would then create a sub-list using an empty review file off of that master list to find their library's items. And I'll just give you a quick example of what that looks like in a second here. Couple of examples of MCFLS master lists are, let's go back into our create list here, file 83, the calf leg J master list. If we look at show info for that particular list, you'll see it's looking at the entire bibliographic range, but it's a real simple list. It's just looking at every bibliographic record that has a calf leg equal to J. This is useful for database maintenance because the folks that are involved with that for suburban libraries would run a sublist finding their items, and then they would respond. They will respond to the MPL Tech Processing Unit and give them the information they need about the item to allow the overlay for OCLC to take place. So that's an important master list. It's one of the original master lists that we've done. So let's just use this one as an example. If I do a cap flag J master list here, I know that exists. I have to choose a empty review file. Let's choose something smaller. Do 98 here. In order to make this work, let's just do, what should we use? Let's just use North Shore. I'm going to pick on North Shore or something. Okay, so our stored record type, since we're dealing with bibliographic records, this would be an example where your stored record type would still be bib. And but instead of looking at just the entire database, we're just going to be searching off of that review file. So we're going to choose review from this drop down here. And then we can search for that MCFLS master list. Now, one of the frustrations dealing with create lists is the fact that you have to wade through 300, 200 review files to find the one that you want. One of the tricks you can use is to just find the first letter of the review file that you're after. So in our case, since it's cat flag J master list, we would just keep typing the letter C until our list popped up in the view right here. So we just keep on hitting C until we find cat flag J master list highlighted. Let's see how long this takes. There it is. So once we see it, we can either tab or hit enter. And we're just going to be searching off of this one and finding the North Shore items. So it's an example where you would use your item loc criteria to just limit it to your library's items. In our case, it's item, item loc, and since it's North Shore, we're going to have to use 8A and 8CZZ. So we can take a look at that. Another option here is if you don't have items, well, you should have items attached to these. Sometimes you won't. You can also use item or the bibliographic type and use the bibloc equal to 8. So let's just use that options here. So we go bib. 26 is the field for bibloc equal to 8. And the reason this works rather than using the range between 8A and 8CZZ is that all the biblocs are equal to 8, and that is a unique identifier for North Shore. For biblocs, you don't have to use that range in North Shore. It's only for the item locations. So if we do this Boolean search off for North Shore cat flag J, okay, so we found 36 records of that belonging to North Shore that are cat flag J. So if we double click on that, you can see that the item loc matches up. If we take a look at view, we'll go back to actually viewing the bibliographic record itself. You'll notice that the bibloc is equal to 8. And that's just one example of how a master list would work. You would just do a simple search like that to search off of the master list. Another example of a master list is file 82, which is MCFLS stale holds. You do the same process using the item loc search criteria off of your stale holds to find your holds that need to be addressed. These are holds that are have been out there for at least 2 weeks or in transit. And we also have other lists. For example, file 80 is long overdue items. That's something that we run every month. If we look at show info for that, it's searching off of the overdue items system file that we use on a routine basis. Every overdue item in the system is located in this file. We save that to create lists, and then we can search off of it, and we can say item due date between 1/1/91 and 10/31/2013. So it's going to find everything that's been due over 1 year, and then you can use that file to find items in your library that you need to delete or reorder. And lastly, there's a number of these, but the last one I want to point out was the master no cert 5-year. That's one of the more popular master lists that we run. We do show info on this. You can see how crazy some of these lists can get. You can run similar type lists for yourself, but we've been doing it for so long. You can just take whatever we do here and actually use it with your own criteria if you want. But this just shows you how many items have not served in the system for over 5 years or have not served at all and are older than 5 years. A full list of master lists is available off of this website as well, so it's insert C81. And I've got to update the dates of the names here, but all of these review files are still in use. We use a lot of these for staff to be able to run off sublists. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to look at was a couple of exercises. I wanted to give you these exercises so these are very common create list searches that many people have done. This is a circ example. On occasion, people will call complaining that they're getting calls for hold notifications, but they're not a member of the system, don't have a library card, and it's obviously a patron has their phone number in their record, and we need to get that out of their record. So generally, you'll know what the phone number is. The patron will give you their phone number so you can find it in the database, but none of our phone numbers are indexed. So it's not something you can just plug into like a patron name field, like an address or a barcode. It's not any index like that, so it's not easy to find. So what you need to do is use the number and then plug it into a create list search and then find it that way. The way to do that, the new way to do that is to use the browse query tool. So if we go back to our catalog mode, click on browse query. You can use this stored record type of patron. So we're after a patron phone number. And since this is a common search thing, something that we do on a routine basis, we could use the existing search or retrieve saved query. You're going to use retrieve saved query here. And since we've got 399 of them, we can sort by query name and look for the one called patron phone search. There it is, number 294. We select that one, and it's already pre-populated with all the fields that you need to search on. The only thing you're going to need to change is the number. So in this case, I have the number already put in here because that's the way I've saved it to the database. But you would put in your patron's phone number, the one that's getting the calls in error, so you can find the patron record that needed to be fixed. So with everything in here the way it needs to be, you're looking at telephone, the telephone field and the telephone to field to make sure that you're looking at all the fields and different variations, one with a dash and one without. And then you just click the search button here, and if you're lucky, you will find the record that you're after. Now, my record has 555 in it, so that looks like a legit record that we need to look at. I'm not sure why this one would have it, but that's interesting. So at this point, what you could do is open up the record, make the corrections, and then save it, and then you're done. You could also put a note field or message field in the record stating, you know, when this patron comes in next time, have them correct the phone number. That's the type of thing you could do with it. You'll notice also that I didn't put in the 414 area code because my search criteria used has instead of equals. I'm looking at both 262 and 414, any permutation of 555-5555. So any area code would work. That just casts the net a little bit wider. Okay. And then I close my search, and then it's gone. The last example, I'm not going to do a list for, but I'm going to show you what it looks like, is something more of another search example of creating a list of items at Wauwatosa that are 5 weeks overdue, and then get information on the item and the patron and check the item out. So this is something where you may want to extend this beyond 5 weeks, but something where you may want to create a list of patrons that you need to contact. You want to contact in person to see if you can get those items back. To find out how to do this type of search, you would go to this page for Create Lists that we've set up. And this particular search is the second to last here underneath the examples. So let's just show you how these work. So if I click on this link here, it's got a step-by-step instruction on how to find these types of items, and you can hopefully use these types of examples within your own searches. So in this case, we're going to break this up. We're going to find a list of items at Wauwatosa, and they have to be at least 5 weeks overdue. We can make our search a lot simpler by searching off the overdue items review file that we spoke of before. The item loc has 34. We've seen that before. And then the due date, you would just have to go back 5 weeks. So this is doing it on the 18th. Today would have been October 16th. And make sure your due date is using a range for 1/1/91 and 10/14 or 10/16/2014. That will find everything that has a legit due date. Remember, you have to use this range for due dates. Legit due date all the way up until 10/14 or 10/16. And then once you have that data, this is a good search. Once you have that data, you can export the item record, the item information from both patron, bibliographic, and item fields into an Excel file, and then use that Excel file to do your contact. Notice that this file name also has the .csv extension on it, so that's how you would do that type of search. Okay, so just to wrap up, there's a couple of future sessions that will be coming up shortly. There is an advanced Create List session that is scheduled for December 2nd from 1 to 4 p.m. using GoToMeeting as well. In that session, we look at things in Create List that we did not cover today, like appending records, deduping, using indexes for searching. And we spend quite a bit of time using what's called regular expressions with Create List, which is a very powerful tool. You use it a lot with coding and using specific languages, coding for computers. Regex is used quite a bit with those areas, but you can also use it in Create List. It's really a cool thing. So if you're interested in that, you want to get a little bit more information about Create List, you can attend that session. If you need the registration form for that, please contact your director. they were given that information. We also have a SQL training, which I'm really excited about, a SQL training scheduled for March 4th at MCFLS. That'll be a face-to-face session. And that's going to be talking about this new SQL access that we have for Sierra. Sierra is the first time we've had access to the real inner workings of the database. And there's methods that you can use to extract even more information out of the system using SQL. So we'll have training on that. That's going to be March 4th. So are there any questions? Anybody out there have any issues or comments that you'd like to make that we can tackle right now? You can use the chat interface or use your microphone as well. Okay, last call. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me. I would reference that manual first. But if you have any further questions, anything I can help you out with, feel free to just give me a call or send me an email. So thanks a lot, everybody, and hope you have a great Thursday. Thank you.